What's going on, guys? Welcome back. And today I am going to be talking once again about a Marvel film. I talked about The Incredible Hulk yesterday, so today I'll be talking about Captain America the First Avenger. I know this is out of order, but I've already talked about the other films in between um, Incredible Hulk and this one. And, well, actually, I haven't talked about Thor yet, but I will talk about Thor next. But, yeah, I'm going to be talking about the First Avenger today. And, this has always been, I think, one of the most underrated MCU films, and it's one of my favorites, actually. It's one of my favorite, most underrated, I think. It has actually not very many issues, I think, and I think a lot of people forget about it. And forget about how good it is. There's a lot of good stuff in this movie. I think a lot of people forget about. Um, First, I wanted to talk about like the musical connections. I actually forgot. I know you're probably gonna be like, oh my god, this guy talks about music all the time, but I can't help it. I love music, and I forgot that Alan Silvestri actually composed the score for this film before he did the Avengers. So I think this is actually the first film he did um a score for in the MCU. So if I said in my Avengers review that that was the first movie Alan Silvestri did a score for, I was wrong. And rewatching it, I noticed a lot of really interesting connections between this film and especially Endgame. There's some that you hear in this movie that you hear in the Avengers the year after this movie came out. Um, but there are a lot of musical cues that are brought back, and this movie actually is a lot more importance than I thought. And rewatching it, I noticed a lot more things. I've seen Endgame twice now, and I noticed a lot of things that this movie kind of sets up and they're paid off or kind of called back to, harkened back to in Endgame. Um, but first, yeah, the main theme I recognized from Captain America the First or from Endgame is right here in this track from Captain America the First Avenger, Factory Inferno. Listen to this. Does that sound familiar? I was really surprised to hear that because it's the same as this track from Endgame, which we all know, worth it. This track from Endgame, which we all know is when Cap lifts Mjolnir. So yeah, they use the same theme. That's really interesting. There's a lot of little connections like that, but that cue really stood out to me on rewatch. I was really surprised to hear it in there. Um, yeah, that's the main thing I wanted to um bring up because there's a lot of people that criticize the Marvel movies for not having connections in music, and I think the Avengers movies, in that regard, I haven't mentioned this a lot in the past, but I think the Avengers movies do the best in that regard, where a lot of the music, they bring back a lot of past music, and rewatching the older movies recently, it's been really fun to be like, oh yeah, that sounds familiar, and then remembering. Because the second I was watching, the second I heard that, I was like, oh, that's when Cap lifted Mjolnir. It's pretty cool um, to just see that, like rewatching these movies and just seeing all the little like connections that they have through the music and yeah, it's just great. Alan Silvestri has been the one consistent composer and has brought back many original themes from these films. So credit to him. Great job, Alan Silvestri. You're one of my favorite composers, and definitely my favorite composer in the MCU. Anyway, moving on to the actual movie. I have some notes written down. It has a great tone. This movie has a really great tone. It's got this kind of, it is like a 1940s war movie. It doesn't feel like a war movie really, but it's really good. It has a really good tone, and the shifts in tone are kind of good for the most part. Like I forgot that it's basically like the first scene. Like the first scene is Red Skull breaking into this. Well, the first scene is like these people discovering Captain America in the ice or his shield, and then it cuts to Red Skull invading this one place where he talks about like the gods and stuff, and then that ties into Thor, which actually came out earlier that year. So I guess people who had seen Thor would have remembered that. But yeah, he's talking about the gods and stuff, and yeah, so if you're watching this movie like through the MCU timeline, this is actually the first one, and Filch is there, and he shoots Filch in the head, or no, he shoots Filch in the chest, which is kind of bad. But it's Hugo Weaving and Red Skull. I have this written down as well. Red Skull's passable. He's a passable villain. He's whatever. Because like I say, the tone for the most part in the first half feels really good. Like the third scene, I'd say, main scene is just it shows Steve Rogers and he's signing up for the war. They won't let him sign up, and then he's watching like this movie, and then this bully, this guy is like standing up. He's like, "Start the stupid cartoon." He's like, "Would you mind showing some respect? Shut up or something." And then he stands up. He sees how big this guy is, and then I forgot that like the scene, the fight in the alley. It's basically the first scene of the movie. The how you do this all day, like it's basically the first scene of the movie. It's really cool. Rewatching it, and it just really picks up, and you just immediately like sympathize with this character, and it reminds me, like this is probably my favorite movie with Steve Rogers, Captain America. Like rewatching it, I rewatched Winter Soldier earlier in the year, but I might rewatch it in Civil War. And that's the thing. I think people forget about how good this movie actually is because of how great Winter Soldier and Civil War. I don't know. I have to refresh my opinion on it because I really used to love that movie, but I think in some regards it doesn't really hold up that well anymore. But um, I think people just really hold those two movies in really high regard and forget how good this movie is. And I know my dad and some people hold this as like the best movie in the Captain America trilogy. And yeah, it's like people will just look back at this movie and just go, it's trash, whatever. But it's a really important movie actually to the MCU in terms of like the Infinity Stones and all this. There's a lot of little things, like I say, tidbits that kind of connect it to other films, and it's actually one of the more important um, Marvel films, I'd say. Like out of the first half of the MCU, like it's actually one of the more important ones that kind of ties a lot of ends together. Um, so yeah, I actually forgot this movie is actually pretty important for the Captain America story and for the MCU as a whole. Um, what else do I have written down here? I guess I'll talk about the problems this movie has. Um, the movie should have been longer. I feel, and this isn't something where like I don't even think the movie should have been that much longer. Like my parents and people are making jokes about how you think it should have been like 3 hours again. No, I don't think it actually should have been like 4 hours or whatever. I actually just think it should have been like 15 minutes. Like it could have been a half hour longer, honestly, because like the first half has a really good speed to it. Like I say, goes through Steve Rogers. It feels like it takes its time. Like it takes its time showing him, and then showing how he reacts to people. And then there's that really interesting moment, which watching Endgame, and I remembered it from First Avenger. I just didn't remember where it was from, and then which scene it was in. And it's when Steve's like, "I don't want to go dancing with you and the girls or whatever," and then he's like, "Don't." Bucky's like, "Don't do anything stupid until I get back," and then Steve says, "How can I? You're taking all the stupid with you." And that's a contrast to Infinity War, where Bucky says uh, the same thing, but it's in reverse. That's great. When Steve goes back to return the stones at the end of Endgame. That's really interesting. That's a really interesting parallel. I didn't remember which scene it was in. It's kind of a weird scene to place it in. Maybe it would have worked better, like if it's like before Bucky died or something, and that would have been more impactful. But still, a great callback. Just it's great. It's another one of those things in Endgame that just ties these films back full circle. Um, what else do we have to? Yeah, so getting back to my main issue with the film, this is the main criticism that most people aim at it. Is it's like, okay, the movie has a really good pace. It shows him. He becomes Captain America. He's on stage, and then he goes to the Hydra base. Feels like a good pace for the most part. Um, Pretty good. And then they get back from World War II, and they hang around for a little while. It's kind of cool. Um, and then suddenly Cap gets a shield, and he goes to Howard Stark. He's like, "I have some ideas for the uniform." He's like, "Whatever you want, pal." And then suddenly it just montages through him and the Howling Commandos just fighting people, World War II, and it kind of just takes away what could have been some good time spent on the villain. Because Red Skull, I was saying how there's a good pace through the first half. Whenever it cuts back to Red Skull, it feels really weird because there's like a lot of great scenes with Steve, and then when it cuts back to Red Skull, it feels really weird. So it's just intercut of like these random scenes of like them fighting, and then Red Skull like getting mad because everyone's failing. Like it's just like he has no development, and then it's just like, okay, we need to have the final battle now. But that goes back to another thing. The actors are really great in this movie. Like rewatching it, Haley Atwell, I think it is, as Peggy Carter. She's great, honestly. Like rewatching it, she's so good in that role. Um, and when I was rewatching it, like for the first little half of it, and for like basically for the entire film, her acting really stood out to me. Like she's a really great actress. I don't know if I've seen her in too much other stuff, but she was really good in this movie. Like she really stood out to me rewatching it. Of course, Chris Evans, Sebastian Stan. I think this is like before he got actually good as Bucky, because he feels kind of weird in this movie. It feels like they had to rush to the final battles, and like it just feels kind of weird. Like it doesn't feel like Bucky's death holds enough significance, because he falls, and then even Steve's reaction, he just kind of like like puts his head in his hands or whatever, and he's like supposed to be crying, and then he's like trying to get drunk in a bar, and he's talking to Peggy about how he can't get drunk because of the super soldier serum, and it's kind of depressing at first, but then she's just like, "You got to go fight the good fight," and he's like, "Okay," and it just feels like they kind of rush past it. And it doesn't feel like there's enough time spent on the emotion of that idea, but whatever. It just feels like they could have spent an extra 15 minutes instead of just montaging through everything, because it's literally like a 5 minute montage. You don't get a lot of stuff with him in the actual like full costume, and yeah, it's just kind of annoying. It's just him jumping out of tanks and they explode. I mean, it's kind of cool, but like it's just kind of annoying. They just montage through it, and it's another thing is the movie when it's goofy, it actually kind of works. Like I was saying, how Incredible Hulk, when it's goofy, it kind of doesn't work, but it kind of works with this tone of like Red Skull's kind of a goofy villain, and with this movie, they have it's got kind of a serious tone at some points, but like the when it gets kind of goofy and like when they have like laser gun, tesseract guns or whatever, it kind of works for me. Like the goofiness, kind of the campiness. Like there's a part where they go to the roof. Red Skull takes Zola to the roof just to get in his jet. And he's like, "Where will I sit?" And he's like, gives him the keys to like his giant, like crazy fancy car. He's like, "Not a scratch, doctor, not a scratch." Like it's really funny and it actually kind of works. Um, in the tone that they have for the film. So that's what I like. The movie can actually be kind of goofy, and it actually kind of works for me when it gets goofy. Unlike something like Incredible Hulk, where it feels kind of weird when they try to be goofy, because that movie has, for the most part, a pretty serious tone. But going back to it, the actors once again are doing a really great job. Like, shoot, what's his name? Um, Tommy Lee Jones as the army general. He's like I think one of the most underrated side characters in the in the MCU. Like people forget about this movie and they forget about how funny he is. He's really funny, and like when he's like sitting and he's like interrogating Zola with like the beef or whatever, the steak or whatever, and he's just eating the steak, and he's like, "Oh well, last person killed was Captain Rogers' friend." He's like, it's really funny, like the way he's intimidating, and the way you see Zola kind of freaking out. Like it's pretty funny, and I like that character a lot. Um, but yeah, Sebastian Stan as Bucky is fine. Hugo Weaving has that kind of chewing of the scenery as Red Skull, but Chris Evans, Haley Atwell, and Tommy Lee Jones really stick out to me in this movie. Stanley Tucci's doing a pretty good job as well as Dr. Is it Erskine or whatever, Erskine, whatever the heck his name is. He does a pretty good job. Um, the Howling Commandos, though, I think they do a better job with those type of characters in Wonder Woman. But the thing is, when I was rewatching it, I was really realizing there's a lot of similarities between this and Wonder Woman. There's a scene where a villain soldier is like, I there's like a villain henchman, and they're like, "Oh, we fought to the last man," and then he's like, "Evidently not," and he shoots him with a gun. General Ludendorff does that in Wonder Woman to one of his men. Red Skull does that in this movie to one of his Hydra men. It's really weird. It's really weird seeing that. Um, Also, there's like a scene where they sit down at a bar and Tommy Lee Jones is like, "We're getting together with the best man," and then Steve is like, "No offense, sir, but so am I." And then there's like a scene with him and like all these guys getting drunk in a bar, just like Wonder Woman with Steve Trevor and their gang of guys, whatever their name is, um, just like in Wonder Woman. And of course, a character called Steve, played by an actor named Chris, crashing a plane or sacrificing themselves in a plane. Not both of them crash it, but sacrificing themselves in a plane. It does feel weird when Steve sacrifices himself, though, because it's kind of like, okay, you have like a million other ways you could make it out of this, but he's just like, "There's no time!" And it's another thing where the final battle with Red Skull could have had more weight, but it just feels kind of like we have to rush to this ending, and like it just feels so rushed when he just goes up and sits down. He's like, "I have to die!" Like, I don't know, it feels a little bit cheapened towards the end because there's so much great stuff built up to it. But anyway, that's pretty much all I have to say about Captain America: The First Avenger. Um, Let me know. Do you like this movie? Because I see a lot more people nowadays, more and more people nowadays, defending the First Avenger. I am a First Avenger defender, apologist, I guess you would say. Um, but it does have issues, and I think they could have maybe extended it by 15 to 30 minutes, 20, 30 minutes, because like they're not afraid of getting long if they want to tell a story they want to tell, like Endgame. Um, so I think they could have done that with First Avenger. Like they didn't need to make it 3 hours, but like 2.5 hours, that wouldn't have been bad if they wanted to develop the villain more, um, and have more like scenes, quiet scenes with people. But as it is, it's a pretty solid movie, and I'm gonna give it an A minus. Um, Rewatching it, I was really surprised rewatching it, and I really enjoyed it throughout. Like I never felt bored, and I thoroughly enjoyed myself. But it does have issues. So you guys let me know what you think of Captain America: The First Avenger. Do you like it? Do you not like it? What did you think of my review as well? And I hope you guys have a great day. Take care.